Another fine Monday morning, afternoon here. Welcome to INDU, where we are continuing our study of the 5-year legislative review of the Copyright Act. Today we have with us from TELUS Communications, Anne Mainville-Neeson. There you are. Vice President, Broadcasting Policy and Regulatory Affairs, as well Antoine Malak, Senior Regulatory Legal Counsel. From l'Association québécoise de la production médiatique, Hélène Messier, President and Chief Executive Officer. Marie-Christiane Baudré, Director, Legal and Business Affairs, Zone 3. That's exciting, Zone 3. From the Société professionnelle des auteurs et des compositeurs de Québec, Marie-Josée Dupré, Executive Director by video conference from Montreal. Can you hear me? Oh, parfait.
Yes, very well.
And finally, from Association des I can never pronounce that word. Réalisateurs et réalisatrices du Québec, Gabrielle Pelletier, Présidente, and Mélanie Cyr, Executive Director. J'essaie le plus possible que je peux faire.
I'm doing my best.
I believe, Mr. Albus, you have a notice of motion you'd like to present.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize to the witnesses, so I'll make this very quick. Obviously, this is very timely. I'd like to table a notice of motion, and it reads the following. To assist in the review of the Copyright Act, that the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology requests Ministers Freeland and Baines, alongside officials, to come in before the committee and explain the impacts of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement on the intellectual property and copyright regimes in Canada. So obviously this isn't something we can debate at this time, but I do hope that members find it to be timely and that we can discuss this at an upcoming meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to go to presentations. Why don't we start with TELUS Communications. Madame Neeson, Mainville-Neeson, vous avez le plancher jusqu'à 7 minutes.
You have the floor for up to 7 minutes. Well, thank you very much.
My presentation in English, but I'm happy to respond to any questions in French or in English. Ça me fait plaisir. Good afternoon, and thank you on behalf of TELUS Communications for the opportunity to appear before the committee. My name is Anne Mainville-Neeson, and I'm Vice President of Broadcasting Policy and Regulatory Affairs at TELUS. And with me is Antoine Malak, Senior Regulatory Legal Counsel at TELUS and an intellectual property lawyer. TELUS is a national communications company, and whether it's connecting Canadians through our wireless or wireline businesses or leveraging the power of digital technology to enhance the delivery of health care services, we are committed to connecting with purpose, positioning Canada for the success in the digital economy and enhancing economic, educational, and health outcomes for all. We provide a wide range of products and services, including wireline and wireless telephony and broadband internet access, health services, home automation and security, and also IPTV-based television distribution. In light of earlier testimony that you've received from other TV service operators, it is relevant to note that unlike our main competitors, TELUS is not vertically integrated, meaning that we do not own any commercial programming services. We are purely an aggregator and distributor of the best content there is to offer. In striving to be an aggregator of choice and the place where Canadians go to access content, we listen to our customers, and we are constantly looking for better ways to meet and anticipate their needs and desires. We know that innovation is essential to competing in the digital environment, where consumers have more choice than ever before. It is our belief that innovation is essential in keeping the Canadian broadcasting system, which is a major source of income for Canadian artists, healthy and competitive. Accordingly, our remarks today are focused on amendments that would foster innovation by promoting efficiency and by increasing the resiliency of the Act in the face of rapid change. I want to start with one of the areas where amendments enacted in 2012 fell a little short on the innovation front. In 2012, Parliament adopted exceptions which would provide users with the right to record a program for later viewing. This recording can be made on their own device or on a network storage space. When the recording is made in the cloud, it is referred to as a Network Personal Video Recorder, or NPVR, or sometimes Cloud PVR. While the 2012 amendments were a step in the right direction, The statutory language contemplates a discrete recording for each user. As a result, an NPVR service provider like ourselves might need to store hundreds of thousands, even millions, of copies of the same recording, one for each user that initiates a recording. That kind of excessive duplication is unnecessarily inefficient and costly for the network operator and creates no value for the rights holder. Innovation dictates leveraging the benefits of network efficiency by sharing a single recording of a program among all the users that initiated a time-shifted recording of that particular program. TELUS recommends that the Act be amended to allow this to happen without any additional liability being incurred by the network operator. Looking to the future and other ways that the Act can more broadly foster innovation and be adaptable to technological change, TELUS recommends that the risks associated with innovation in the face of statutory ambiguity be distributed more evenly between rights holders and innovators. Specifically, we propose some changes to the statutory damages regime in the Act. Under the current rules, the potential liability posed by statutory damages can be completely detached from either the actual harm suffered by rights holders or any profits derived from an infringement. We recommend that the courts be empowered in all cases to adjust statutory damage awards to align them with the circumstances of the infringement, something that the courts already are empowered to do, but in limited circumstances only. Evidence of bad faith should be required to justify statutory damages if they're disproportionate to the infringement, by ensuring that the punitive aspect of these awards is applied only in cases where it is actually appropriate and desirable to do so. The Copyright Act would no longer be discouraging innovation. I would now like to turn to the notice and notice regime. First, TELUS agrees with other ISPs who have presented before you that notice and notice is a reasonable policy approach to copyright infringement because it balances the interests of rights holders and users. We also agree with proposals to mandate the form and the content of notices, especially to require them to be machine readable so that the processing can be as close to fully automated as possible. TELUS also agrees with Minister Baines's earlier announcement that notices should not contain extraneous content such as settlement demands, nor should they contain advertising on where to find legal content, as some have suggested. That is not the purpose of notice and notice. TELUS also echoes TechSavvy's proposal that ISPs be permitted to charge a reasonable fee for forwarding notices. This is not only a matter of fairness to ISPs, who are innocent third parties in copyright disputes, it would also address the potential for misuse of the regime. While the government has announced an intention to take steps to address misuse by prohibiting settlement demands, this doesn't address other forms of misuse, such as fraudulent notices, or notices that include phishing links, which pose a security concern for consumers. Adding an economic cost to accessing the regime would go a long way towards minimizing its abuse. Finally, TELUS also proposes that the separate statutory damages provisions under notice and notice be amended to be harmonized with our proposals for amendments to the broader statutory damages regime under the Act. Specifically, TELUS proposes that under notice and notice, the court should be given the discretion to lower a minimum award to ensure that it is proportional to any actual harm to rights holders, and that evidence of bad faith on the part of the non-compliant ISP be required to justify a disproportionate and punitive level of damages. Such an amendment would go a long way to helping ISPs deal with the significant and increasing costs that are required to incur to help rights holders enforce their rights. In closing, we thank the committee for its work in reviewing this important piece of legislation. Copyright is one of the key legal regimes that govern the digital markets of the modern economy, and we support its intent. In order to maximize the potential for Canada's digital economy, we believe the legislative framework must balance support for creators with the public interest in supporting innovation that leads to new technology and business possibilities for the benefit of all Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to l'Association québécoise de la production médiatique. Madame Messier.
Ms. Messier, please go ahead. Thank you. I will be speaking in French. Mr. Chair, ladies, gentlemen, my name is Hélène Messier, and I am the President, Director General, President, Chief CEO of the Association québécoise de la production médiatique. I am accompanied by Ms. Marie-Christine Baudry, who is our Director of Legal and Business Affairs, Zone 3. Zone 3 is one of the biggest production businesses in Quebec. It works in the film area, and its subsidiary Cinémaginaire recently produced a decline of the American Empire. On television, we produce shows of all types, including youth shows like Jérémie, variety shows such as Infoman, or comedies such as Like Moi. The AQPM includes 150 independent audiovisual production businesses which produce works for film, television, and the internet, which means the vast majority of Quebec businesses that produce for all screens in French and in English. Our association members produce over 500 films, television series, and web series every year that are watched on all screens by millions of viewers. Let's think about Bon Cop, Bad Cop, Mommy, which won the jury prize at the Cannes Festival and the César for Best Foreign Film, and shows such as La Voix Fugueuse or the Daily Show District 31, to name just a few. These are very successful and envied by many. In 2016-2017, the film and television production in Canada represented a global volume of about $8.38 billion, which is the direct and indirect source of over 700,000 full-time equivalent jobs. In Quebec, it represents a global volume of $1.8 billion, and the industry generates 36,400 jobs. So we thank the committee for providing us with an opportunity to contribute to its parliamentary review of the Copyright Act. Although many issues interest our association, such as piracy and broadening private copying in order to include audiovisual works, today's comments will mainly deal with the issue of rights ownership in audiovisual, when it comes to audiovisual. If it's easy to determine who is the author of a sculpture or a song, it is quite another thing in the case of audiovisual works, whether that be a television series, a film, or a work that has been designed for the web. The Berne Convention to protect literary and artistic works has allowed countries independence to establish rights ownership over film products. In Canada, the identification process had begun at the beginning of the 1990s, but it was delayed since. Canadian legislation is therefore silent on the subject. Therefore, only the courts have the power to identify authors of film according to the facts associated with that work. Few cases having been tested, there is no clear rule to follow. Several countries have chosen to identify the author of an audiovisual work in their national statutes. In the United States, in the Royal Kingdom, in Australia, and in New Zealand, which are countries who have a copyright philosophy that is similar to Canada's, have identified the producer as being having sole ownership, except for the United Kingdom, where the rights owners are the producer and the director. But in Canada, not only are producers not recognized as rights owners, but on top of that, they must produce and use audiovisual works according to an uncertain model and must manage all the risks that are associated with that. Certain clarifications were made thanks to the collective agreements that were negotiated in the interim between unions representing scriptwriters, directors, music composers, and singers, and the AQPM on behalf of the producers they represent. The producer obtains the rights and pays royalties for using these rights. We have to wonder if the category of film work or cinematographic work is still the right way to describe all this reality now that creates so many different formats. Our association believes that, as defined, as the film works is not technologically neutral, since it mentions traditional production techniques rather than the work in and of itself. That's why we represent that the category audiovisual work be created and defined as being an animated sequence of sequence of animated images accompanied by sound or not, which would be assimilated into film works. So what about the identity of the rights holders? when it comes to audiovisual works. We have to decide how to describe such a work. Is it the work in and of itself, or is it a compilation? Does the script or the music, for example, is that part of an indivisible whole, or are they distinct works that are whose sum is greater than the parts? They're in its parts. So who owns the rights over all of that? The association claims that the producer's role in the creative process and in making an audiovisual work means that you have to recognize their creative contribution to the work. Therefore, he would have ownership over the audiovisual right with all the associated rights without penalizing those who have created the underlying works. Therefore, Ms. Baudry is going to explain why it's essential that the producer be the rights holder for audiovisual works as from the very beginning. Good afternoon. Being a producer, a film producer, is quite an art. Being a film producer is quite an art. The producer is the conductor of the audiovisual work or the film. He's the only person that is there from the beginning of the development of the very idea to the final delivery, and even afterwards, when it is being rebroadcast. He is responsible for the funding, for project management, as well as of its creative elements. Indeed, as much by establishing funding as by the choice of artists that are being hired throughout the project, the producer determines or guides and influences the content of this work, whether it's a talk show, a series, a variety series, a documentary, or a drama. Furthermore, through his involvement on a daily basis in the creative development of the film, he participates in the very creation of that work. Ultimately, he decides, while of course respecting the scriptwriters and directors' prerogatives. According to the type of production, whether it be fiction, a variety show, filming a concert, or a documentary, the nature of the artists' participants, the scriptwriters, the directors, and the composers will be different. The composers are also variable. There's original music or existing music, an original screenplay or an adapted from a book, archival sequences, existing art works, or the creation of original artworks. The combinations are infinite, and people claiming to be the author of one or the other are many. The producer has to be sure that he holds, without any uncertainty, all rights over the audiovisual work. Not only does he play a major creative role, but he is the only one responsible for making sure that the contractual commitments are being respected with respect to third parties, including financing partners and the production team. And once again the producer who alone takes on the risks of going over budget, which may happen during the production of this audiovisual work. His involvement is total, and commitment too. Today, it's almost impossible to produce such a work without using tax credits. In order to have access to federal film tax credits, the CAVCO, the Canadian Audiovisual Certification Office, requires in its tax credit guidelines, that the producer have exclusive copyright ownership over the global use of this. In the English version, they talk about copyright ownership. Furthermore, nearly all the funds for financing such production in Canada, as well as certain banking funding agreements, require that the producer be accredited by CAVCO, and therefore that he respect that requirement as a condition to fund the production. Any change to the Copyright Act that would grant ownership to a third party would contradict these financing requirements and would make Canadian film production far more fragile. Once the work has been produced, it's also up to the producer to determine, fund, and manage how it will go out into the world, and negotiates contracts with third parties across the whole world in some cases. He may decide to act alone in this, or to use distribution companies as intermediaries or as distribution agents. There are many facets that involve many rights. For example, we can talk about distributing the work itself in different existing markets here or in other territories, whether it depends on the format, depends on the marketing of these products that may be derived from this work. May I just interrupt you? I'm so sorry, but we're up to nearly 11 minutes now, so can we wrap up, please? I'm so sorry. Yes, we said several times that we just wanted to resolve the uncertainty surrounding these works, and we thought that if you decided not to keep this solution, we'd have to ensure that for each category of creator that could be identified in the Copyright Act, the government should ensure that it does not contradict existing collective agreements, and also there should be a legal presumption such as there is in France in favor of the producer to allow the producer to make the most of all the rights associated with the work. Thank you so much.
Des auteurs.
We now turn to the Société professionnelle des auteurs et des compositeurs du Québec. Marie-Josée Dupré, you have 7 minutes. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I hope that you can hear me okay. I can hear an echo on my end. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'd like to thank you for this invitation to take part in your consultations. My name is Marie-Josée Dupré, and I'm the Executive Director of the Société professionnelle des auteurs et des compositeurs du Québec, SPAC, which was founded 37 years ago to promote and protect the professional and intellectual rights of composers and throughout Quebec and the Canadian Francophonie. Culture is an important part of the Canadian economy, but not all authors are recognized for their contribution. They often work in the shadows and are not often acknowledged for their work, and yet they are the ones that are the first link in a long chain of links, but they're not often well paid. Here are our top areas of focus regarding an adequate Copyright Act in Canada. The duration of copyright. In light of the outcomes of the consultative process, we are happy that Canada will extend copyright to 75 years of age after an author is deceased, and that is in line with our world counterparts. There are, however, a lot of exceptions in the legislation, and therefore we need a limiting scope in terms of an extension to 70 years. It would be a pity to have compensation get even lower because of an overly broad interpretation of the legislative acceptance. When it comes to content produced by users, given the recent majority decisions of the European Parliament, given the responsibility for shared content and royalties paid to rights holders. Once again, Canada, up until yesterday, was one of the very few countries, if not the only country, to consider this form of broadcasting of works completely exempt. It is time for this to be reviewed and for the government to put in place measures that are necessary, and that is to recognise YouTube, among other platforms, as providing for appropriate royalties for creative works on their platforms. The copyright, which enables Canadians to use musical content of their choice and to record it, and in return the creators receive royalties, and this applies to all the platforms that consumers use to reproduce recordings. The Parliament's intention was clearly to create a technically neutral regime that wouldn't become obsolete just by simple virtue of the fact that platforms become obsolete. It used to apply to CDs, which are now outdated, and consumers continue, however, to make recorded copies on other kinds of devices, such as laptops and tablets, which are often a way of getting around paying royalties. And this deprives artists of millions of dollars of royalties. the legislation must clearly stipulate that the regime applies to all platforms, including current platforms and those that are on the horizon. Moreover, companies that creators deal with in their business use in the terms of their contracts the ability to produce and disseminate by all means possible that currently exist and that may exist in the future. However, creators' income is limited because the regime doesn't keep pace with technological changes. Now, in addition to what I've just said, we need to ensure that quicker decisions are made so that creators can enjoy compensation that is appropriate, and also so that creators can know what to expect in a reasonable time frame. Waiting for years for decisions to come down is not an effective way of handling the process, is a major irritant for producers. In addition to these long waiting periods, users are disadvantaged given the speed with which new technologies are developed. The Canadian government needs to ensure that the appropriate resources are earmarked for the board so that it become more effective and have a positive impact on both creators and users. In closing, the government should continue in the same vein, and that is to recognise the value of these works that are used on a daily basis by consumers and ensure that creators get fair compensation. Otherwise, culture, broadly speaking, will be the loser. Creators are at the heart of culture, and without them, no content whatsoever would be possible for us to enjoy. Thank you very much. Now, I'd now like to turn to the Association des réalisateurs et réalisatrices du Québec. Gabriel Pelletier. Well, I'm excited to speak to you, but I'm going to hand the floor over to Mylène Cyr to begin with. 7 minutes. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it's with tremendous pleasure that the Association des réalisateurs et réalisatrices du Québec is before you today to speak about this important major review of the Copyright Act. My name is Mylène Cyr, and I'm the Director General of the association. I'm accompanied by Mr. Gabriel Pelletier, Executive Director. ARC is a professional union of freelance producers with over 750 members who work mainly in French in cinema, television, and on the web. Our association advocates for the interests, both economic, cultural, social, and property rights of all producers in Quebec. Collective bargaining with involving producers is one of the primary roles of our association. Now let me refer to some of the main objectives expressed by Minister Baines and Joly in their letter to the President. How can we ensure that the Copyright Act works effectively, ensuring that the producers and creators get fair market value? And how can our domestic regime position creators so that they are competitive and maximise their potential on the world stage? Now, in the current iteration of the Act, the determination of an author of a work is something that is done arbitrarily. Normally it is a collaborative work, and this is no exception. Under Canadian law, if there are numerous candidates for the title of movie producer, the producer will be among them, just like the screenwriter. According to the Supreme Court decision, these creators use their judgment and their talent to create these movies. And under the legislation, they are the rights holders, the primary rights holders of the cinematographic work. However, there's a certain ambiguity when it comes to this. In the case of producers, this ambiguity prevents them from receiving fair market value. And as raised by the SAD-SESCAM, some users of audiovisual works rely on this ambiguity to refuse to bargain license with SACD-SCAM. Currently, producers don't receive the compensation that they're entitled to. And recently, in our collective bargaining, the AQPM questioned the title holdership of freelance producers for movies. And this is interesting when given that the broadcasting market is continuously changing and fair market value must evolve along with it. It is there crucial that we provide the market with a chain of clear titles so that it can be negotiated based on fair market value for creators. We believe in the current review that it would behoove the committee to clarify all the ambiguity around the status and the rights of producers as well as screenwriters. ARC proposes a simple amendment to the legislation which does not in any way call into question the principles and underpinnings of the legislation, but that on the other hand will address any ambiguity regarding freelance producers' rights. And we would submit an amendment to section 34.1, which refers to a presumption of property. Moreover, this proposal enjoys a consensus among the following artists associations: SATEC, WGC, and the DGC. It also corresponds to the objectives of the Société de Gestion Collective. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Gabriel Pelletier, and I'm not only the president of ARC, but also a producer. I'm extremely pleased to be able to speak before you today. I've been waiting for this moment for a good many years. In 2000, I produced a film entitled La vie après l'amour, which won the Billet d'Or for the biggest, as a biggest seller for Quebec cinema. And it even reached second place in terms of a sale of tickets for all Canadian cinema. Its commercial success was profitable not only for the companies that broadcast it, that is the movie houses, but also for the company and for me as a producer. So how much did I get? Zero. Zero was the amount that the producer gets. For the 6 films that I have an opportunity to produce in my career, many of which reaped great rewards at the box office, I didn't have any trouble to get paid in other countries of the Francophonie. It's only in Canada where my ownership and of the copyright as a producer was called into question, and I was not given my fair share. Due to an ambiguity in the Canadian legislation, the SACD that represents my rights is not empowered to bargain with the companies that use my works. Nobody is calling into question the rights of other artists who contribute to the creation of our movies and also those that create music. So why is this the case in terms of copyright for producers? How can we claim that Xavier Dolan, Philippe Fardot, or Léa Poul aren't providing a unique and individual flavour to their works? I'm a freelance artist, and each freelance artist has to cope with the job insecurity in an extremely competitive context. We need to come up with ideas and projects and then pitch them to producers and then to investors. And only a few of them actually see the light of day. Very few of us are able to meet our financial obligations when we produce a work. So getting fair payment for our productions is the best way of ensuring that we're able to do what we do best, and that is to create new productions. And that is how we can maximize our potential, quote unquote, and become competitive on the world and domestic stage, as Ministers Baines and Joly have suggested. Members, you have an opportunity to remedy a problem that has, in fact, straitjacketed creators in the cinema world, producers, screenwriters. All you have to do is clarify the legislation and provide a framework for it, and in doing so you can help creators to contribute effectively to the Canadian creative economy and consolidate it at the same time. Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll move right into questions. Mr. Graham, you have 7 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Pelletier. Could you just give me a better sense of this $0, please? Could you elaborate on the structure and the way that the pie is divvied up, if you will. Well, there are different ways of commercializing copyright for producers, either through collective bargaining, for example, when producers are given licenses, or when broadcasters are provided given use of these products, for example, television and digital platforms. The SACD, the DGC is working on the front end, and they are paid their royalties on the front end, but Francophone creators are paid on the back end, if you will, after the fact. So we are paid on a per-use basis. Now, broadcasters are challenging the copyright ownership of producers and creators, and then therefore they've refused to negotiate royalties for each use of our products. Now, historically, producers, and this is the reason for this, they were the employees of the broadcasters, and under Canadian law, copyright, well, the title holders are first and foremost employers, but our market has changed since that time, and broadcasters have given production houses the responsibility to create these works. And from that point on, we should have become the owners of these copyright and been able to bargain around them, but they have denied us that opportunity. Would you like to respond to that, ma'am? Well, I think that we don't take into consideration or give any credence to any payments to producers. And I think that producers are entitled to some of the revenue and the spin-offs. And the reason they don't get any payment is because oftentimes the producer doesn't get anything. Now, were they to get a percentage of the royalties for use on other platforms, if the producer doesn't get anything, and it has a ripple effect. So, and this is, of course, a problem that starts with the producer, but the initial amount of money is considerable when it comes to the first use of a copyrighted product. Now, if you take Sartec, for example, and we have agreements with Sartec as producers and screenwriters, from the SADC, when there is a broadcast, they get an amount that is paid for directly by the distributors. And with the producers, they negotiate the operating costs so to ensure the economic life of the work. The producers enjoy that same right under our collective agreements. And based in keeping with the economic life of the work, sometimes this work is used elsewhere and they are entitled to royalties, 4, 5, 6% or more based on what they've negotiated. And this all stems from their collective agreement. Various types of productions, including audiovisual productions and magazines, feature films, there's a whole host of contexts that need to be taken into consideration when we think of cinematographic productions. I'm sorry, I don't have much time left, but that seemed to elicit a reaction on your part, sir. I just wanted to point out that screenwriters do have certain rights when it comes to the use of their creations. And SADC has traditionally negotiated on their behalf because most of them are freelancers, and moreover, Ms. Baudry is confusing dramas and non-dramas, if you will. And the copyright is different in both cases. And it's our ability to negotiate which is at stake here. We're talking about providing an operational license to the producer. But unfortunately, the way profit is defined, well, it's impossible to get any royalties based on the formula. Now let's look at the biggest box office hit in Canada, Good Cop, Bad Cop. I'm sure you all know it. That got $8 million at the box office. 50% of that $8 million will go to the cinema operators. So that leaves $4 million. And 25 to 30% goes to the distributors. So that's about $1.5 million left on the table. Now, the film often may have cost $5 million to produce. So you can see that it's impossible to derive any profit as the creators, and therefore creators are bereft of a negotiating power.
Fair play.
We supported the fair play. We're not part of the coalition, but we did support the fair play application. And the reason is that piracy is an important problem for Canada, and we believe as an ISP that we have a role to play, an ethical obligation, let's say, to ensure that piracy is addressed.
But you weren't a member of Fair Play at the outset, so why not? What caused the change of mind?
It wasn't a change of mind. It's simply that we're not vertically integrated. We're not the primary owners of rights, and therefore we supported as separately.
All right, thank you.
7 minutes.
Okay, can I have that back?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank everyone here for their testimony today and for your expertise. I'd like to start with TELUS. Sincerely appreciated that you've brought up a number of small and reasonable requests. I think that basing off of some of the changes in the 2012 Copyright Modernization Act and getting feedback is very good, so appreciate that. On your first recommendation regarding a single recording, so would a single recording framework that is accessed by users, as you have recommended, align with the current laws around personal recordings and licenses for an on-demand services? So in my mind, a single copy saved on a server sounds more like a version of on-demand rather than a personal recording.
It's all about who is making that recording. On an NPVR, it's no different than someone who has recorded on their device at home, on their home PVR, except for the network provider, where we are also providers of on-demand, and therefore we negotiate those rights and we pay for those rights. But that's in order to offer to the programs to persons who have not recorded and decide to look through our menu and access some of the great content that we have to offer. With an NPVR, this is someone who has chosen to record something, and they are doing so on a general cloud space. As operators of that cloud, why have that excessive duplication? So many copies of the same thing being stored, which is not ecologically friendly either, to have so much storage of the same things. And so it's simply a back office request in order to streamline and have that single copy. Only those who have selected the record would have access to that single recording. And we would have the metadata and whatnot, other information, to ensure that if someone started to record 5 minutes late, they would only access that program starting 5 minutes late.
So the reason why I ask, I guess, is because these statutory reviews happen on a regular basis, maybe not as fast or as quickly as some would want. However, it didn't quite answer the question, because, again, if you have one copy that's being passed out, it does sound like it's more of a on-demand service than where someone has chosen to record something for their personal watching later on. Again, I just worry about some of the content holders that may form deals with TELUS and other companies like yourself, where they will say you're violating the terms of the arrangement because it's less of a personal recording and more of a on-demand service.
And that's why we want to limit our proposal to that personal relationship with the recording. So the person who makes that recording is the only person who can access that recording, as opposed to an on-demand where anyone who wants to watch a program can access it. And the difference being that we're not proposing that we as network operators simply record everything and for later access by people who have recorded, nor do we propose that people be able to have indefinite amounts of storage so that the user ends up recording everything. We are proposing essentially replicating the home PVR on a network, but streamlining so that you don't have as much waste. Waste is not conducive to innovation.
Thank you. On your second recommendation, specifically talks about creating, strengthening innovation in Canada by allowing new technologies and services to come to the market without taking much of a risk or a huge risk. Can you give us some concrete examples of these new technologies or services that you have in mind?
For example, the NPVR, for example, new business models, which, as we mentioned with respect to notice and notice, I'm trying to think of what innovation on a more general perspective. But when we talk about a notice and notice, we'd like automation. And more automation leads to potential errors. And the error rate can never be brought down to absolute zero, which means that we'd be taking that risk by putting more automation into our notice and notice regime or execution. We're exposing ourselves to that risk, which is unfortunate because we are facing increasing costs and increasing number of notices to forward.
So again, we had testimony last week about more of a standardized notice on notice regime, as well as limiting what content can be included in that. So you're in favor of that then?
Absolutely.
So you also say that grossly disproportionate damages have been assessed. Can you give us a concrete example of that?
No, because the instances where they are disproportionate, it's more about the risk of innovation not coming to market because of that fear. So the idea being that under the Act, there is no limit. So you face, if we decide to implement something that ultimately ends up being non-compliant, and we implemented something that out of good faith, and as we've heard from other testimony even today or previously, that applying and interpreting the Copyright Act is very complex. And so the concern is more with that potential of people not bringing things to market because of that potential for great damages. So I'm not suggesting that this has actually occurred in the market where there's an example where someone faced the significant risk. Instead, it's that that fact that things are not being brought to market at all, which is an even worse case for Canada.
So I recognize the point. So let's maybe talk about innovation that is happening right now. There's a considerable amount of innovation on online platforms, like, for example, YouTube and also Twitch. And those often, there are a number of users that have often said they are putting forward content in good faith and have still been hit by copyright infringement notices. Do you see that space as one that the law needs to better manage?
It certainly is on many fronts, whether you're looking at piracy, where this notion that there are copyright infringement notices that are fraudulent or that are being abused for whatever reason, phishing exercises, which causes a security concern. Yeah, I think that there are definitely concerns where you have we receive thousands of hundreds of thousands of notices per month. There are many of those that may not be from actual copyright holders.
So, so that would be one aspect there, is that there are some people that are utilizing the notice on notice regime for their own nefarious ends. Okay, and I think that's something we should be taking note of. But again, I specifically referenced YouTube and Twitch. A lot of young people are using those platforms. A lot of not so young people, I would say, utilize those platforms. This is your chance to talk about the way the law operates in terms of that. As as a provider, an internet service provider, do you have any insight on where we can make that better?
Well, as an internet service provider, we're distributing the content from, these services are being used by our customers, but we don't have insight as to what notices YouTube might be receiving of infringement, right? So YouTube will also receive some notices of infringement, as would the copyright holder or the ISP. So I think that your question is better directed at those particular platforms.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to Mr. Angus. You have 7 minutes.
Merci, monsieur. Je vous remercie pour la présentation.
I'd like to thank you for your presentations today. As a musician and composer, I fully understand the need to respect copyright and for Parliament to implement legislation that is going to create a good environment for the creative community. For that subject, we need to be very specific, and therefore I will be asking my questions in English, if you don't mind.
Dupré, I'm interested, you mentioned in terms of where we're looking at getting revenue streams for musicians and songs, you mentioned YouTube. What is the regime right now for collecting royalties from YouTube?
Well, if I remember correctly, I've worked at SOCAN, the collective that manages the public performance of music. There are some licenses, license fees, that are paid from YouTube, but not necessarily for all the user-generated content. These are experimental licenses, I guess, if it hasn't changed yet. So right now, what we got actually as a decision from the European Parliament is that the new, well, if it's all the statutes are voted, then each of the countries in the EU will have to make sure that they adjust their copyright act so that all these platforms have the obligation to pay license fees. They have a responsibility as a broadcaster, let's say, I'm not using the right word here, but even though the content is not theirs specifically, to make sure that they compensate the rights holders.
Well, my hair is gray, and I am old enough to remember that there was no glory years for musicians in copyright. We were robbed always. I one year co-wrote the video of the year, and I told my wife, "This is our year, honey. We're going to get the big money," because we were in heavy rotation, and my check was $25. Because at that time, the cable networks that were running TV shows claimed they were not making money off it. They were offering a service to musicians, and SOCAN and that fought that, and we changed the legislation. And then, of course, when cable networks went out of business. And when YouTube started, everyone said, well, they just got started in a garage, and, they're young upstarts. But now they are part of the biggest corporate entity in the world, Google. Everybody I know shares music on YouTube. I live on YouTube. SOCAN's able to go after hairstylists and little restaurants to pay copyright fees. Wouldn't it be better if we just had a blanket copyright legislation so that people who are posting songs, making songs, videos out of songs, that there was a blanket fee that went in and then could be distributed among artists? Would that, like we did with cable television, like we've done in other areas, provide a guaranteed revenue stream for the use of music on YouTube?
I don't know if they will be able to get that, but the idea of YouTube and all the digital services like anyway Spotify or Google Play or any of them is the fact that their network is around the world. So for each and every country, they need to get their licenses according to what's played in their countries. Although I guess at some point in time they may think of getting kind of multi-territory licensing. I think it has been discussed in the past, but right now that's the why each and every country has to jump in and make sure that they protect their own interest for what's going on in with the consumers from their country.
Right, thank you. Madame Messier, you were talking about the difficulty in identifying, there's a number of competing interests or potential interests in terms of production, and Mr. Pelletier, I'd be interested in your thoughts as well. With the new NAFTA agreement to extend copyright to 70 years after death, I've talked to filmmakers who are very concerned because they don't know who controls sometimes the film that they want to use historically. Sometimes they're held under large corporate licenses and they become very expensive, and it's very difficult to be able to assure that you're going to be able to say, I have the copyright to film if you're using historic film where you don't know. Are you concerned that this will affect the ability of Canadian creative community to produce new works based on historic film and images?
Je pense que l'absence de définition de l'œuvre
I think the absence of a definition of the audiovisual cinematographic works is already a source of this problem, because it's difficult to know who is the rights holder. And therefore, how do you calculate copyright, whether it's be 50 years or 70 years? I'd say that under the current Canadian regime, it's already quite difficult to know what the duration of copyright is. So it is already problematic in any case. I believe that identifying authors will help define the duration of copyright. You must understand that here in Canada, copyright is associated to a person rather than a company, and it's the contrary in the U.S. In the United States, they use a work-for-hire system, just as for employers and employees here. So the corporations own copyright, are copyright owners. Here, it is affiliated with an individual or several individuals, and therefore follows the lifespan of those individuals. So 50 years, and for 50 years after their life ends.
Things that you're forced to send out all the time. I'm interested because I got 3 of them this summer, 3 days in a row from my apartment in Ottawa where I hadn't been in a month. And so I didn't know if it was real. I didn't know if somebody was trying to shake me down. How are you able to ascertain when you're sending these out? Because I wasn't in my apartment for a month, so nobody else was there, but I got 3 notice motions that I was apparently downloading films at my apartment. So how do you separate for consumers so that we can identify where serious piracy is taking place and where just maybe random algorithmic errors are taking place in terms of what they're tracking?
Right. All we can do is verify the information that's provided to us by the rights holder. That includes the time, date, and IP address of the downloads. When all that information is accurate, we forward the notice, and we're obligated to do so. And that's why I can understand that it's a concern for users, and why we want to ensure that there are new provisions that ensure that we can at least weed out some of the more nefarious ones. But there will always be notices that are provided that it's supposed to serve an educational purpose, and sometimes it just doesn't hit that mark.
Okay. Thank you. Merci.
Ms. Cesar Chavan, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you. And Ms. Neeson, you spoke during your testimony that innovation is essential to keeping the industry healthy. And while I appreciate that, I just wanted you to possibly describe how this innovation disruption has affected the interests of copyright holders in the last 10 years.
I think it's innovation and disruption do go hand in hand, and we certainly believe in balance. The idea is not to balance only in favor of network operators, for example, but rather to ensure that we have the right means in place, the right legislative framework in place to promote innovation to the benefit of rights holders. The good innovation should benefit all, the users, the rights holders, and the intermediaries like ISPs or TV service providers.
Has the Copyright Act restricted your ability at all to develop and continue to use current and emerging technologies?
Yes, it has. And the examples that we've provided were, for example, the NPVR, other things where we've been looking at different means of providing notices in order to attempt to address some of the concerns that were raised by Mr. Albus and Mr. Angus. So these are the types of things that we're constantly looking at, and I would say that the disproportionate and unbalanced sharing of risk between network operators and rights holders is working against innovation. We just don't bring things to market.
So last week we had some other ISPs here with us, and I understand that you're not vertically integrated like some of your counterparts, Rogers and Bell, for example. One of the main arguments made by the opponents of the safe harbors provision in the Act is to challenge the dumb pipe theory. Can you describe the extent to which the ISPs can identify content in the data that they transmit?
I think every ISP will have different means of, and how much what's commonly called as deep packet inspection. Not all ISPs do that kind of work, and to the extent that those varying degrees, I would say that TELUS is very much at the low end of that, and so there's very little ability to discover exactly what's being downloaded. A bit is a bit is a bit.
So there's no capacity for TELUS to do that.
I wouldn't say no capacity, but it's not an area that that we've generally gone at this point.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's it. Yep.
Okay.
Oh, can I?
You're sharing it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you were sharing your time.
Donc, j'aimerais...
I'd like to ask a question of all four of you. Ms. Cyr and Mr. Pelletier, you're talking about changing the balance between authors and producers. We have an ecosystem for films. How does it work exactly? I just want to ask the question first, and then you can take a stab at answering it if you would. So we have the original balance that was struck, and the author, under a contract, hands over their rights in the production process of a movie, for example. Now, Ms. Mercier and Ms. Bouvet has described an ecosystem in which there are a number of risks that are taken in the production of a film, not by the authors per se. But is this fair, or is it unfair? And why would one try and change that ecosystem? Are some folks underpaid? Doesn't this take into account the risks that are taken? Well, from the outside, we see an ecosystem that seems to be working well, and it seems to be quite good. Well, I think your question is one that I can answer. We don't want to change the ecosystem per se. On the contrary, we want to preserve it. Currently, authors give licenses to producers who are then able to use their works. We don't want to change anything about that. We just want the legislation to be clarified so there's a presumption of ownership. In the absence of proof to the contrary, that is a contract with the producer, which would be evidence to the contrary, or that another creator might claim copyright. There's a presumption that the screenwriter and producer are at the outset the authors of the work. That needs to be clarified because the legislation is currently ambiguous, especially in respect of the presumption of ownership. When the name of the producer is indicated in a generic manner, they are presumed to be the author. And that could suggest that producers are authors, and that is not the case. And nothing under Canadian common law would suggest that producers are one and the same as authors. Authors are folks that use their talent and their best judgment to produce a movie. Now, I respect producers who take a financial risk, but I don't think putting together a budget equates to creating a work of art. Ms. Mercier, if you would. You know, I'd just like to say right off the bat that when it comes to, when talking about movies, we're all talking about audiovisual works. Of course, there's feature films, but also variety productions, soap operas, TV reality shows, And sometimes there are producers that get involved at the end stages of production. And of course, this is defined in the law. Now, having provided that context, producers often are the ones that start the production process, whether it be a drama. Of course, they have an author that's involved who has copyright on this over their script. But in developing that piece of work, there's a discussion, there's a collaborative process. Now, I'm talking about a drama here, but you can imagine in a variety program or in a reality TV show, the producer comes at the stage of production. Now, and they help to negotiate the budget, the scope of the project. Is it a soap opera that'll last for 30 minutes, 1 hour? All of the decisions regarding the content of the work, the vision around the work, and that's part and parcel with that. So you're telling us today that we have no impact in the creation of a work, and that's just not true. That's wrong. I can understand that in a feature film, there's a distinction to be made in the development, but it's not the case in all cases. And you cannot discount the work that a producer does in producing a work. Can I just clarify something? Well, maybe at the end we can come back to you because you've gone over your time. Mr. Chong.
Si, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Question pour...
I have a question for the Société professionnelle des auteurs et des compositeurs du Québec. The analysts have done their jobs and they've said that Statistics Canada between 2010 and 2015, Canadian music composers' income or production houses increased exponentially. And that's a huge increase in the revenue that they're getting. And yet the average income for full-time employees has also gone up, except income that is derived by singers and musicians. And the average income of Quebec and Canadian singers and has dropped to roughly $19,000 from $19,800. And that's a drop of about $800 per year. Now, why over this 5-year period are they faced with this drop in income? Well, when it comes to production houses for music, now there are a couple of major league companies such as Universal, Sony, and Warner Chappell. And then there's a whole lot of smaller and mid-range production houses. And they sign up a number of creators. I don't know what the number of singers and or composers is, but in any event, when they sign up these creators, right off the bat, the contracts state that they will cede ownership of their work. And that's the general practice and rule of thumb in Canada and elsewhere in the world too. And that is that an author-composer will cede ownership of their work and will no longer belong to them, but in return, they will get compensated. Now, the compensation in Canada is that 50% goes to the production house and 50% to authors and composers. And if you're working alone, you get 50%. And of course, if you're a group, 2 or more, well, then you get an increasingly small share. Now, obviously, companies can build up capital over time, and yet the author, well, if the public production house takes 50%, and if the maybe they're part of a group of 10 creators, and therefore they'll only get a tenth of that 50%, and therefore the income is carved up in that manner and handed out. And it's been said on numerous occasions that internet dissemination of works has never been a way of recovering the money that's lost from the demise of CDs. And so at the end of the day, revenue has either stagnated or dropped. And it's certainly not huge amounts of money that are being earned by these creators. And that is unfortunately the plight of creators in Canada. Now, in the physical world, if you're selling an album, it's 10 cents per song for the creation of that song. And if you have 10 songs on your album, well, the total amount is $1. And that $1, 50 cents goes to the production house, and 50 cents goes to the authors, composers, one, two, or a group. So clearly the production houses aren't the losers. The companies, it's the creators themselves who have to cede their intellectual property, their creative property, and they have to live with what they've sown. Question: in your opinion, what can be done to remedy this situation? The big companies are raking in increasingly large profits, and yet creators' revenue is dropping exponentially. Well, indeed, there's currently a number of ways of looking at this. A number of composers have decided to become self-promoters, in a sense. So they have copyright ownership, and they are able to derive the highest revenue possible. So they get their own license rather than ceding ownership. But this isn't a widespread commercial practice. You have to get an authorization to use your own work as opposed to ceding the ownership of that work. Now, until the tables are turned, and I don't think that this situation is in any way going to improve for authors and composers. But as I said, in the if the system had evolved along with technological advances, given that there's so many, that there's a dissemination on laptops and on iPads and so on and so forth. They're the new CDs, if you will. Now, if the regime had just kept pace with new technologies, at least creators would get the fair share of the royalties, and it would be enough. But you have to understand that there's millions of hits on Spotify or YouTube. You have to have millions of hits just to earn $50. So how can you expect a creator of to earn a living? And as of course, the singer of that piece of music wouldn't have even been able to sing if that song wasn't produced by a creator in the first place. But it seems like the creators are getting gypped in the whole process, and they are not being treated fairly. And we're talking about albums that cost not so much to produce at the end of the day on these new digital platforms. Thank you.
Thanks to Mr. Chong. Across the way, we're neighbors, neighboring ridings, and you're on the same question that I had. So thank you to the chair for giving us a little bit more time on that answer. I want to build on that a little bit more, if I might, with Ms. Dupré. I was at the Guelph Youth Music Center yesterday, and Sue Smith got an award she got her name up on the Wall of Honor. She does a lot of instruction with youth in Guelph. She couldn't pay Pete Townsend's fees to do musicals, so she created musicals herself. and she's created over 500 characters and many, many musicals over the years with the kids. You touched on the up and coming writers and how they have to register their works. Could you just maybe expand on how easy or hard that is for them to do? Thinking of Sue Smith's work.
It is very hard to do to manage all the aspects of your career. Being a creator usually means that you're not necessarily an entrepreneur. However, you need to understand all the means of all the contracts, the dealings that you will have. Excuse me, I got a bad cold.
That's okay.
That you need to understand all the mostly financial impact and on all the dealings that you will have with a record label and a music publisher. And so this is important. That's what we try at SPAC. That's one of the goal that we have is to help manage that the young up and coming authors and composers can be more comfortable with all these aspects.
So if I could build on that towards, you made a comment about the Copyright Board. It's something I asked a few meetings back around the decisions from the Copyright Board taking so long. Whether that problem, in your opinion, has to do with resources, or maybe it's because we're not clear enough with the legislation. I also want to just suggest of the composition of the board, maybe to include musicians or performers in other ways, so that we get their perspectives. Could you comment a little bit more on the Copyright Board, please?
I guess to have a musician or authors and or composer on the board would be is a very interesting idea. However, you need still to have someone that is professional in all, that knows the business almost inside out, to make sure that they can bring some perspective to the board and the decision. As for the decision process, actually, I guess maybe there's some resources that are maybe deficient, but also I think the process itself, trying to submit evidence and then delay, and then the other party submits evidence, and it's it's building up cases, and it's taking time. I remember, like I said, because I used to work at SOCAN in the licensing department, I was not directly involved with the Copyright Board, but knowing that the cable tariff was, I think, proposed in 1990 and was first approved in 1996. And I think that the first internet tariff was proposed in 1996, and the first decision was in 2004.
Okay.
So it makes it, it's really difficult for societies to make sure, and then you have to adjust to all the standards and stuff.
Right, going with the speed of business. Thank you. And Mr. Pelletier, you've made a comment that really piqued my interest. I was speaking with a filmmaker this weekend, and he said that part of a film that used to be produced in Canada is now moved over to South Africa because of tax benefits. And then the rest of the film goes to Los Angeles, does some rework on that, and then the finishing is done under Canada because of the tax benefits that we have in Canada. We're looking at copyright, but there's a bigger picture here of being competitive, making money in Canada, but also through whatever incentives. Could you comment on kind of the overall ecosystem we have?
Well, actually, in Canada, the nationality of the copyright lies with the nationality of the producer, but the droit d'auteur, the copyright itself, is with the author. In the situation you're describing, I think it might be an American production, since you say some money is going to Los Angeles. So the copyright must lie with an American company, probably.
Okay.
So,
okay. Thank you. That's my 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
5 minutes. Thank you very much. We're going to move to Mr. Lloyd. You have 5 minutes.
Fighting the person on this one. Thank you for coming today, and it's been very interesting, this whole study, and having you here. One of the things I just wanted to you, Mr. Pelletier, you said you're a producer.
Director.
You're a director, okay. There was a little bit of a miscommunication. I heard you say producer earlier, and you said I received 0 royalties And so I was curious as a producer how that worked. But since you're a director,
No, I'm sure my producer received some money, maybe
Yeah.
not royalties, but
so how, if you're not given royalties, how are producers, directors compensated?
we're paid a fee for our services originally, and we give out an original license for the original use of the film or television. And then secondary uses is where we have a problem getting paid. So, for example, Xavier Dolan, if his film goes on television, he's not paid because he's represented by SACD. He's not paid as a director. He does.
So what's an example of an original use and then a secondary use?
The original use would be in the theaters.
Okay.
Right. And then secondary use are television or other platforms.
So it'd be basically like a book author. They get paid for the initial sale of the book, but if somebody goes and sells it used, they're not getting paid for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And for directors that their works are sold outside the country, for like Xavier Dolan sells in France, then he gets royalties.
Just not in Canada.
Not in Canada.
So I'm aware that
he gets royalties as a director and as a scriptwriter in his case, because he does both.
Now, I'm aware in the United States, actors are paid something, and they're not called royalties, they're called residuals, I believe.
I'm sorry, where?
An actor, like in the United States, for
Yes,
example,
yes.
they get paid a residual.
Yes.
So anytime there's a rerun, they get a check in the mail.
Yes.
And is that currently the case in Canada? Do
Yes,
actors receive
yes,
residuals?
the same way. That's why in my films or television, because I have done television as well. Yes, the actors that I direct, I'll get droit voisin, or so they do get paid. I'm the only one that doesn't.
Okay, so, and presumably the artists who make
Well,
the
for
cinematic
secondary use.
soundtracks are also telling us that they're not getting any royalties. The authors of cinematic soundtracks, so like the musicians who make the soundtracks for movies, they say they're also not getting royalties.
No, they get. I'm not a musician, but I think they get reproduction rights, and they do license their music to the director. So as I say, I'm paid in the original use for my services and the original license, but it's collecting royalties for secondary uses that is a problem.
Thank you. That's very illuminating. And then my next set of questions, quickly for TELUS. You were talking about NPRV or PVR. I've used like time recording things myself, and so I'm just a little bit wanting some clarification. Every time somebody makes a recording, every individual, you maintain a copy of each individual's recording. And what you would like this committee to recommend is that there is just one recording that is kept. Is there a legal requirement that you are to keep every individual recording? Like, why should this committee recommend that?
Right. Under the Act presently, in order to avoid liability as a network provider, we would have to store an individual copy for each person who records. We store that individual copy. We're suggesting that that's extremely inefficient, and it just would require such excessive duplication of memory storage, which ultimately is not conducive to additional innovation and to, because it's costly.
What is the liability? Can you describe the nature of the liability?
Yes, and I might actually ask Antoine to take that question.
Yeah, the issue is that the right belongs to the user. The user is making the recording, but storing it on the network. And so they qualify for an exception, which is commonly known as a time-shifting exception. And the way it's written now, it's personal and based on your ability to create a discrete recording as though it were an in-home or on your personal device. When you create it on the network, that doesn't change. You can't share it. It has to be used for your private purposes.
So it would be massively beneficial if we would recommend time-shifting rights for companies such as yourselves, and that would massively increase your efficiency because you wouldn't have to keep every different copy. You could keep one united copy.
Well, yeah, what we're asking is if you have the one copy on the network and you can share that copy amongst users, it'll still be considered, won't be considered a public communication, but still a private communication for private purposes. And that would bring it within that exception.
Just my final question is, how would that impact the creators? Like, would that negatively impact the creators if we were to?
It wouldn't, no, because we've already decided years ago we had the debate, should we allow exceptions to enable this, and we decided yes, but we did it inefficiently. Okay. So creators are not deprived of anything that they have currently.
And we're not suggesting supplanting the whole video on demand. We are a video on demand provider, and we hope that people will continue to purchase things on video on demand as well. But the current right that exists for personal use to record, to the extent that it's more and more common to do so on a network rather than individual storage devices, we're merely suggesting that let's do that efficiently.
Would it be cheaper? Thank you.
For us, yes. We might pass those costs along.
Actually, I would like a little clarification. So at home, I have a PVR. So I record everything, and I go home and I watch it later on. But it's recorded on the hard drive. It's not recorded to the network.
Correct.
Correct? So what are you referring to?
So we're suggesting that that transition, because there is the technology now for you to be able to record directly to the network, and the innovation to do so. The technology is there, but the innovation to do so has been very slow to come to market because of the risk associated for the network provider. So we're suggesting that changes to the Act that make it such that we wouldn't incur additional liability. We would bring that to the market. So you would now have that your own storage space that you would normally have on your individual hard drive. Imagine that you had that up in the cloud, except as the cloud operator, rather than have all of those individual storage spaces, which could mean so much storage, which of course storage, there is a cost to that, not only for the ISP, but also for the network provider, but also from an environmental perspective. The storage space needs cooling and needs all kinds of electricity and usage. So there's various elements of inefficiency here that we're trying to address. So you would store all the things that you store on your own hard drive at home, you would store it in the cloud. And the cloud operator would then streamline things in the back office. You wouldn't even know that in the back there, if you've recorded, you would retrieve it more or less in the same way. It would be seamless to you on whether or not it's on your personal drive or in the cloud. But on the network side, we would suggest that seamless to the consumer, the network operator puts things together and does not save millions and millions of copies of the same thing. And there are ways that we can ensure with metadata and other information that's saved from your individual recording. If you came in 5 minutes late, we would ensure that we're only delivering what it is that you've recorded. So coming in 5 minutes late or 5 minutes early, 5 minutes later, however people choose to record. This type of information can be saved without saving a whole new copy of the same thing.
So, sorry, I've got to clear this up in my own mind. So is this something similar, like what you're referring to? Sounds almost like a Netflix model.
No,
right?
Because Netflix is different. And Netflix is more like our video on demand service, where we have negotiated rights, and you as an individual haven't decided to record something. And right now, under the current Copyright Act, you are entitled to record something on your own device or on a network. Netflix or our video on demand service is taking that obligation away from you and saying, hey, we're going to offer you a service. If you forget to record or you don't want to be bothered to pre-record things, we will offer you the service access to all of this library of content. Great content to be offered, whether it's through Netflix or the individual video on demand services. And the difference there is that those rights are negotiated with the rights holders, and they act independently from the current right that exists right now. You still have that option to record on the cloud, and whether it's on the cloud or on your own personal hard drive. So those things currently exist independently. All we're asking is that in the back office of our network operations, we not be forced to do things in such an inefficient way that it makes that service way more costly than it needs to be.
Thank you. We're going to move to Mr. Zahari. You have 5 minutes. Sorry, I didn't take away your time.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. Going back along the same line, I do have a box, and I do record various programs, and I often go and see them, and I decide when to erase let's say the film I was watching or the program I was watching, to clear space so I can save more. Now, with what you're suggesting, NPVR on network, do we still have that option of being able to watch a selected few, and then decide what our storage size is going to be, and be able to to review it or see it as often as we want?
Yes, it's absolutely intended that you would have some designated amount of storage space in the cloud that you choose to purchase. In the same way that the box that you've chosen had a specific size of storage space for your PVR, you would have in the network a similar size that you then choose to make space or not. The back office elements that I'm talking about here are seamless to you. So as the consumer, you would then choose to record certain things, and after you've reached your limit, you choose to delete them or not in order to make space for more, or you purchase more space. We'd be very happy if you purchase more space, but that would be a different business model than it is certainly not our intention that you would otherwise have unlimited recordings simply because we have a more efficient back-end system.
So all we are doing is we are moving our storage into cloud.
Yes.
We are saying this much storage we want, and we still select which program do you want to record. And all you're saying is allow me to streamline my back office, and I will provide one copy of that. So when you select, it's going to be there as a placeholder, and rather than you having to copy. Okay, I understand that. Okay, going back to Mr. Pelletier, there seems to be, at least I'm confused. There was some discussion around author, creator, and also producer, and there was some also, Madame Messier, you're trying to say, at least the way I understood it, that the producers really need to negotiate their own compensation. And if they don't negotiate, there's really nothing left for them to benefit for when it goes to different platform. Did I miss something, or?
Well, I was saying that we negotiate our rights simply, and Mrs. Messier was saying that that producers were authors, which I disagree with.
So help me understand the
J'aimerais
difference
ça parler pour moi-même. Je pense.
I would like to speak for myself. I think what we've established is that the producer or director receive an initial fee for their services, and then following that, they negotiate through collective agreement or through their own contract rights as to the general usage of the work. And I think Madame Bourdieu wanted to add something. Yes, in television, I can tell you that that royalties are paid for first use in television for revenues that we receive from broadcasters, and that's part of the basic license that that we receive. But in television, it's a bit different from what you were explained in feature films. In feature films, you have to be careful. The producer has investors, and the amounts received first go to distributors. The first revenues are distributed amongst those broadcasting the film, and then, or showing the film rather, and then the money has to be given back to investors. When there's money left after all of that, then it's shared with scriptwriters and directors, and depending how much is left. Of course, investors have priority as to so that they get a return on their investment. I would like to correct something. Under our collective agreement with the AQPM, directors don't receive royalties at the beginning for anything that has to do with funding a production. It's once the production has been, or rather the original broadcasting license has been, is over with, then there are royalties on successive resales. So there are royalties in reality because the ARFQ collect these royalties. Generally, it's when it's in the context of foreign sales that we get royalties. Well, allow me to correct the record, please. We have an example of a show that's broadcast on Radio-Canada. So Radio-Canada got the right to broadcast for 2 seasons. And then in versions ESDV and ESDA and ESVG. So that's part of the contract we have with the director in this contract, under this contract. So any sums we receive from Radio-Canada that comes from the VSDA or through subscribers or the other one, a percentage will be given to the director. Right now, we have distribution reports to that effect to the RRAQ. Now, they may not be huge sums, but the producer himself does not receive much money either under that regime. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I joined KPAC when I was 17 and went on the road. That became SOCAN. I won't say how long I did that, how many years ago. But over the years, I've received revenues from television, from book publishing, from music, and I'm still involved. I find the question with music, Madame Dupré, very interesting because there have been some very good upsides from the digital revolution. The cost of recording dropped substantially. We used to spend almost all our money on lawyers' fees, and we never saw a dime because all those recoupables they charged to our account. If the record company didn't want to stock you, there went your product. Now you can stock it yourself online. So there's an upside. The downside is the disappearance of live music across the country. Bands being told they actually have to use T-shirts to pay to tour now, which used to be 20 years ago, people would have laughed at that. And then on the revenue streams, we've lost the private copy and levy. We've lost the royalty mechanicals from radio. And we're seeing musicians where we're talking a continual drop in income. And now Spotify is the latest where you get, I think, like 0.0005 cents for every 1,000 plays or something. I don't know of any other artist sector that faces such uncertainty in terms of its remuneration stream. There are good opportunities in the digital realm for musicians, but there's also still a lot of pitfalls. How would you describe the reality for working artists today in the music world, and where do we need to start finding some level of coherent remuneration?
Wow. Indeed, the situation is not the best, and mostly the digital world, what all the license fees that are now calculated per view, which is totally insane, the number of views that you need to reach in order to get some revenue. So, but they see this as a one-on-one communication as opposed to massive communication like radio and audiences and concerts and so on and so forth. I don't know where they will, if the license fees that we get from those services are not adjusted to reflect somewhat what it used to be, as you know, in the physical world with CDs. Well, we'll never get there anyway. You said that there was no live entertainment anymore. There are still, but people think that music is free. Mm-hmm. That's a restaurant or bar will pay for their food, will pay for their beer, but when it comes to musician, it's kind of, oh, I'm promoting you. So then you shouldn't be paid for this. You just get the door and stuff like that. Well, it's the philosophy of free music.
But we felt the same with previous transitions. I mean, radio did not want to pay music. They said they were offering a service. Radio did pay. It transformed the recording industry. We saw that with cable television paid when they weren't going to pay. I guess my question is what is stopping us being able to establish credible but not restrictive copyright licensing agreements with organizations like Spotify, with YouTube? Is it that we need an international movement, or is it? It seems to me that we find these technological barriers always, and then we have to fight, and then that's when artists get remunerated. But we haven't seen that move into this next realm yet.
I don't know if any international move or coalition is possible. Like I said, there were talks some time ago about multi-territorial licensing. So one digital service would get a license from one collective. They would pay all the license fees. So and then it would be distributed in the different societies, and then to the rights holder, obviously. Is this more efficient? But maybe it's more efficient or easy process, but will we get more? It's kind of, okay, what kind of value do we give? Like you said, there's no record, we don't distribute CDs anymore physically. So all the costs have been reduced, but then there was no increase. So I don't know how we will need some help of, the different rights holder to stand together and make sure that they fight for their rights. But I don't have really, the solution to make sure that it goes back to like 20 years ago, where everybody in as a musician had a decent living, actually. So it's very difficult to think of any particular scheme that will be really efficient and payant.
C'est ça.
Sorry for the.
Thank you very much. That's the challenge of this committee, is to try to come up with some credible solutions. We're going to go to the last two questions, 5 minutes each. Mr. Graham.
To pick up where I left off an hour ago with Telus on fair play. Is it okay to pursue users of the internet without a court order?
We believe that the fair play application does provide for procedural fairness, and that's what's really important. The court order process is simply to ensure that there is procedural fairness, and we believe that there's certainly the possibility that you can create an independent agency that would provide that fair process.
You've harped quite a bit on the fact that Bell and Rogers are vertically integrated, and it's a concern that I share. I don't personally believe a company should be media distributor, producer, internet provider, and all at once, because I think there's a fundamental conflict of interest in those companies. Mm-hmm. If you have any thoughts or comments on that, and why TELUS is not a vertically integrated company.
Well, certainly we have expressed significant concerns with various elements of vertical integration, and it's more for another fora and another legislative review happening. We believe the Broadcasting Act does need to be amended in order to be able to address the competitive issues. But why is TELUS not vertically integrated? We simply, obviously, will all pursue our different strategies, and we believe since many years ago, we want to unleash the power of the internet and to provide the best there is to offer. So it's simply a question of strategy, but to the extent that vertical integration can create some incentive and opportunities for anti-competitive conduct, which can harm consumers, that needs to be addressed.
And can you dive a bit more into how it harms consumers?
So mostly from a broadcasting perspective, the broadcasting environment is such that we are required to offer the programming services that the vertically integrated companies own, and they have every incentive to either foreclose competition, so making the certain services that are particularly popular unavailable to us, and we've had to fight through that with the CRTC in the past, or to increase their rivals' cost. So the wholesale rates that we would pay to offer the same programming services that they offer to their subscribers, we would have to pay more for it. And the rationale for doing that is clear. They want to raise our costs so that they can compete against us in various markets, so not just on the broadcasting market, but then also in the various other ways that we compete in the wireless markets, in the internet space, and and television distribution, which of course we all know television is moving online. So to the extent that you might say, well, Rogers Cable is not necessarily competitive with TELUS in our markets because we only offer TV in the West and in parts of Quebec. Ultimately, it does become competitive when they're offering their services online through, for example, Sportsnet Now, which is an over-the-top offering where it can supplant your TV subscription.
Earlier we were talking about DPI, deep packet inspection, as I used to work in the industry. So, does it threaten net neutrality, and what's TELUS's position on net neutrality?
TELUS is a firm believer in net neutrality, and certainly there's. When I say we're a firm believer in net neutrality, I think there are certainly some elements where a principle needs to be applied in such a way that it makes sense for consumers and for the country as a whole. And some elements, for example, security, privacy of information, are principles that sometimes compete with net neutrality. So you need to have balance in applying all of these various principles, which are all equally important.
Well, if you give yourselves the right as an industry to inspect packets, inspect traffic shape, so forth, do you not then give yourself an obligation to monitor that traffic? So if illegal traffic were to go through it, that you'd then have an obligation to react to that? Because you've now taken on that role of judge of the traffic as opposed to just common carrier?
Well, traffic management practices are generally are more commonly applied with respect to peak times and those types of things, as opposed to actually determining what kind of content is or what kind of packets are being transmitted. So,
right, that's my point. I think there's a very important difference to get out there.
It is, and certainly I'm not suggesting that traffic management practices won't necessarily look at different types of content, but certainly these are the types of practices that would be applied and reviewed by the CRTC.
Okay, thank you. I've already been cut off. Thanks.
Off now. And now for the final question of the day, Mr. Albus.
Mr. Chair, and again, thank you to our witnesses today. I'd like to go back to TELUS again. Specifically, since in your brief and in the subsequent discussion here today, you talked a lot about notice on notice and what works in that regime, what doesn't seem to work. And so I can appreciate that when you say you have a lot of fraudulent notices or information that is incorrect, but you have an obligation to pass it on. Do you have any hard data on how often you receive those? Is it 1 out of every 10, 1 out of 100, 1 out of every 1,000?
First of all, the fraudulent notices, we might not be able to detect at all, right? So these are, I wouldn't be able to give you a number on whether or not we are receiving them or not, but the potential is there, and that's our concern, which is why establishing things like the content and the form of the notices is extremely important and may address that. As for the notices that we receive that may be too old, maybe not include all the, we do research to find, do we have any uploads at this time, at this IP address, at this date and this time? How many of those actually aren't, we've done the work, but it turns out that it doesn't appear to be one of our customers? That does happen a lot. So that's the reason why automation becomes so important. When you're looking at hundreds of thousands of notices a month, we certainly don't have time to be able to inspect them all in any great detail.
So we've heard suggestions from other ISPs around notice and notice, specifically around removing settlement offers and a standardized form, but we haven't heard yet about charging right holders to forward those notice. Is it TELUS alone wanting this change, or do you suspect that other companies would also desire to have it brought forward?
We heard TechSavvy suggest it when they appeared last week, and we're not suggesting that it be a cost recovery mechanism, but simply adding some type of cost. So unlike the Norwich orders, where certainly the additional work that you would have to do in order to be able to find additional information beyond the notice and notice work that's done, there you're talking about cost recovery, and that's what Rogers went to the Supreme Court and obtained the right to do. And we certainly support that aspect of cost recovery. On a notice and notice regime, I think that in order to best balance rights holders and the interests of the innocent third parties here, the ISPs, at least adding some cost, not necessarily a cost recovery, but some cost, will at the very least deter any nefarious use, whether it's fraudulent, whether it's phishing, and so we're talking about different types of regimes for notice and an element of cost.
Okay, just in regards, because obviously you viewed last week's meeting. In the meeting, we also discussed the federal court's ability, not capacity, but ability constitutionally to hear. Actually, I shouldn't say constitutionally, but their ability to be able to rule on these matters. Now, you may not be a part of the Fair Play Coalition, but you do support it.
Mm-hmm.
So do you feel that the federal court right now does not have clarity to be able to hear and be able to offer injunctive relief?
No, that's not our suggestion at all. We merely suggest that piracy needs to be addressed in many different fora. And so the federal court is certainly one area that, and in fact, any court can hear matters of copyright infringement, and we believe that they are. They have that ability, they have the expertise. To the extent that court processes may take longer than an administrative process, we believe that there may be value in having an additional opportunity for rights holders, and that's another place for rights holders to go. Piracy is something that needs to be fought on many fronts, in our view.
Okay, well, I appreciate that there's multiple different ways, but Shaw specifically cited that some clarification would be helpful. And that's what we're here to do, is to not only clarify things like notice on notice and also whether or not it's reasonable to have a cloud streaming on demand like mechanism for some of the improvements that you want, but specifically on the clarification to the federal court. Do you think that that there is not enough clarity right now?
There's arguably never sufficient clarity. So especially when it comes to copyright, I think additional clarity could be useful. Is it absolutely necessary? Perhaps.
I'll just add to that. I think what you might be referencing is the point that was made about Section 36 of the Telecommunications Act, where the CRTC needs to approve any blocking of a website.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is that potential that you have, as an ISP, a court order telling you to block a website, and yet you can't do that without the CRTC authorizing it first. So some clarity is needed there. Yes, we do agree with that. The role of the CRTC and how it interplays with the court order would be helpful for an ISP to have clarified.
Thank you. Am I good? I don't know. I'll leave that to voters.
You got another year for that, so. No, are you?
No, we're all done, Mr. Chair.
We're all
Thank you
done.
very much.
Okay, thanks.
I will share my time with.
Well, you had no time left, but go ahead.
Just a quick question. We talk about site blocking. How would you do it? Because we talked earlier about DNS blocking, which is a completely ineffective system. So I'm just curious.
Because we're not part of the Fair Play Coalition, I don't think that we've really considered the various mechanisms of doing so. There are, we've been speaking with our technical people, and there are various ways which have different pitfalls, and certainly overblocking is a big concern. And so doing so in the right way that actually is of value, because if we're only blocking something that can be easily overturned, then it's of no value. So it's a complicated question.
Fair enough. Thank you.
On that note, merci beaucoup pour toutes les présentations.
Thank you very much for all your presentations. Good questions, good answers. We have a lot of work ahead of us.
We are adjourned for the day.